are.
Okay, so welcome to Lovers, Allies, and Friends, and this is my friend Teri, and she is working here as a counselor in South Korea. So I'll let her introduce herself again, Teri Richards, and tell me where you were born, your place of birth.
Oh, okay. So your question, where was I born? I was born in Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I was born in Kansas City, so not far from Fargo, North Dakota.
Yeah, Midwest.
Midwesterners.
Midwesters
right.
represent in South Korea. Here we are.
Well,
How did we get here?
People ask that question, where are you from?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think our generations are changing.
Yeah.
So now I just ask, so where were you born?
Yeah.
And that's often how I answer that question.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I was made in Kansas City, Kansas. So what about your occupation? I said you're a counselor. And how long have you been doing counseling?
Well, there's one more thing I like that you asked where you're born, because I think it's reflective somewhat of the times, like you spoke of, that we are living in times where people haven't necessarily lived in one place.
Yes.
And call themselves especially look at us. Here we
Right.
are in South Korea.
Right.
Doing this global life. And,
Absolutely.
So where are you from question, especially if you have any affiliation with the military or corporation that moves people around a lot. It's like hard to answer where am I from. Well, it's like, well, I live kind of everywhere right now.
Yeah, I know.
So I just wanted to speak to that. There's the sign of the times changing of perhaps a way of doing it, that we're more global citizens.
Yes,
I left into that.
my hometown in 1984. So,
Wow,
am I from Kansas City?
Yeah.
Well, I spent 19 years of my life, there in Kansas City, but the rest of it, I've been moving around the world. So, yeah. So I think that does feed into where are you from? Who are you? Where do you, how do you identify yourself? So, yeah, absolutely.
And the global nature that, especially considering we're having this conversation as we are. So.
Yes. And as counselors, we find that. And so I've been doing counseling. I got the marriage and family therapy degree in 2017, and before that I did pastoral counseling. So been doing it for a while. But what about you? How long have you been doing counseling?
So my current position that I've been doing, which is working for the large healthcare corporation around the world. So about 7.5 years. Prior to that, I guess I worked for, living in New Mexico, I worked for a behavioral health organization for 3 years. So I guess that puts me the 10-year plus range.
Oh, wow.
As a counselor. And then prior to actually getting my degree in it, I started doing work with people in this capacity, but not licensed. Working in a helping profession, not calling myself a counselor. So I guess I'd say over 15 years when I add in all those years. Yeah.
That's quite a while.
Yeah, it's been it's been my occupation, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and sometimes you don't know if you're on duty or off duty when you're talking to friends or relatives, and yes, try not to do that. That's good.
Well, that alone is, that's an interesting point. It's like, and I think that kind of the topic at hand that you were presenting around.
Yeah.
How do we, ultimately take care of ourselves and recognize it? There's a role to it, but there's also just, it's a very natural part of life. Just having, like we're doing right now, just having a conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
So just talking about life in general, which I don't know that people get a chance to actually do that. And counselors provide that professional ability to listen to people's stories objectively. And it's nice to have an objective third party just listen to your story, whether you're venting or you're trying to clarify some issues in your life, that type of thing. So yeah, that's important, which brings us to this discussion with 2020 and COVID. And we've seen the effects, and we've seen how our counseling has increased. So we just wanted to talk about that a little bit. The effects of COVID, according to World Health Organization, are bereavement and isolation, loss of income, and fear. And I'm sure that there's more. But just thinking about that, for like bereavement, I don't know about you, but personally, My mother passed away last year, and our family still hasn't had a funeral or a farewell service for that, memorial service. So that's kind of on hold. And fortunately, I was able to go see her right before COVID struck. So I was actually able to travel, see her, spend some time before she passed away. But other people, I'm sure have gone through this over the last year, and it has infringed upon their ability to say goodbye or to have those final moments. What about you?
So in terms of bereavement or just in general?
Yeah, bereavement.
I haven't experienced directly through COVID the loss, someone actually physically passing during COVID times. It's something I've recognized, or I realize this is perhaps a little bit more professional side than personal. But it does dovetail into the personal as well. Like what I've noticed about COVID is it's really brought up and provided people both a challenge and opportunity. The best way I can speak to it, anything that's lying kind of underneath the surface, unresolved, which could be a bereavement.
Right.
It could be something that I often like to talk about it in the professional with clients. It's almost like the stuff we put in our back of our closet or underneath the bed that we maybe hadn't gotten to or didn't know how to deal with yet.
Yes.
And what I've noticed with the acute nature of stress that's come with COVID, as well as just what it's like, because there's so much loss that cannot be denied that has come the result of COVID. Just a mass amount of people who have transitioned and passed away through the circumstances of the pandemic. So I can't imagine it. Again, it hasn't touched me directly, but it's completely indirectly touched me. And again, really, really well, how else to speak to it, but specifically in that it's like how it has touched into any of those places unresolved. It's like, so if any of those places I've had personally, and again with clients, noticing it's like that have been just like either ready, or whether people are ready for it or not. Kind of like the pandemic, like ready or not, here it is.
Here it is. And how do you deal with it?
How do we cope with it?
Yes.
So I feel like it really has provided people, again, the challenge and opportunity to address unresolved grief.
Yes.
Griefs we weren't able to process at the time.
That's true. That's true.
So I haven't had one of those acutely, but I've certainly could probably... I'm trying to think about any of the experiences I've had around grief that haven't, most of the people I've lost, the timing of it, hasn't been in this time frame. So, yeah.
And there's other losses too. For instance, graduation ceremonies that you couldn't go to.
Big time.
Or parties, birthday parties, anniversaries that get changed because of it. That's impacted many of us.
Not being able to see loved ones and family members, living in another country, not being able to travel home.
Yes.
Even as simple as something I've noticed, but it's quite substantial, but it's very simple, like the loss of physical touch, like people giving each other hugs. It's huge.
It is.
Like was so much a part of my life prior to COVID. Just casual, like friends shaking hands. This substantial. That again, we don't often think about these everyday, the human contact, being with friends, hanging out. I mean, South Korea is a little different right now, but I know when I was in America, there wasn't a lot of people socializing.
Yes.
When we went to lockdowns at different points, and depends on where you were.
Right.
Like that human, like sitting down, like we're doing it right now. We're sitting down together,
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the way things have changed with the touch, you used to be able to hug people, and now we're wearing masks. Something psychological about wearing a mask. It makes you feel like you are, for me, it makes me feel like I'm contagious, or I'm sick, or I'm in an environment where I have to be careful with proximity, which is what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
But it still has an impact upon us mentally as well.
Yeah.
So it's affected us as far as bereavement and losses, as well as feeling isolated.
And so the social contact, isolation, as well as just even social. I've had friends reflecting upon this as well, like being just hanging out with people outside of their bubble, and there's a whole new level of both, I think, social consciousness, but also the loss of it, but also an awkwardness that comes with.
Yes.
And there's a really big question that I actually have a lot is like, how do we go back? You know, like, and that it's not that it doesn't need to necessarily be the same, and also it doesn't have to be. For me, what comes up a lot is, how do we do this in a way that's both conscious and considerate of ourselves and others? You know, like not rushing it, in other words.
And you didn't say, can we go back? Because we can't.
Yeah.
You said, how do we go back?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because it will be different.
Absolutely, and there's another part of when we speak to, it may not be the bereavement level, but a loss, you know, a change.
Yes, that we will all recognize individually and communally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, the isolation, you know, the work aspect. A lot of people have transitioned to online jobs and online workshops and teaching, and so it makes it, that's probably not going to go back to what it used to be. I think a lot of people are going to do a lot more work from home online, which is good in many respects. In some respects, it's bad. You don't have the social networking that you had physically, but you have it telephonically. We used to say telephonically, but now it's internet-wise, so that's true. Wow. So that's good. The effects of COVID also exacerbates, as you mentioned before, other aspects of our lives, you know, other grievances or losses that we've had before, or brings skeletons out of the closet or out from under the bed type of thing. Those that are dealing with loneliness, this will make it worse for them. Do you think that people are feeling more isolated or less isolated with internet, with the ability you know, to do Zoom calls or Skype or these social media that we used to have? Do you think that's increased or decreased the sense of loneliness?
You know, just speaking from my own experience, just depends. I don't know. That's an interesting question, because decreased. I think it's probably exacerbated it for a lot of people. You know, especially people who. You know, I was thinking about myself and, you know, being here away from family and friends for Christmas, and being in a situation and a new culture that, the best way I can describe it is like, I think it's probably back to that, it brings up things again lying underneath the surface for people. You know, and I don't know that isolation and loneliness, like when I speak to it being exacerbated, I think the potential, it's like any of those unresolved places still inside of us.
Yes.
You know, it's such a significant theme, and then there's even like the how do we connect? You know, and it may not just be, yes, we have these new models now, which is one of the blessings, I think, of COVID times, is it's really heightened our ability and our savvy to use and stay connected. Because I've found that to be like one of the plus sides, to be honest. The challenge is then how do you, because some people are spending more time alone, physically speaking, how do we both take care of ourselves and attend to any of those places, almost like you could call your inner shadows or demons, or almost like, again, like that stuff underneath the bed or tucked back in the corner, because you're spending a lot of physical time on your own for people who are. You know, families, and then there's the alternative, families who are quarantined or self-isolating or living together in their bubble and not getting out as much. It's like, it's a whole, I mean, it's a fascinating dynamic.
It is.
Because then there's also like, even though there can even be a sense of isolation and loneliness when people are together.
Sure.
Which is just a fascinating thing. So then one really does have to ask the question if it has anything to do with, it has something to do with, yes, the physicality, like being together. But there's also like that sense can happen when people are with people.
Yes.
And I think if I were to put my finger on it, that's another one of those things that's been highlighted by COVID.
Yes, I agree.
Is that quality of feeling isolated or alone even when you're with people.
Yes.
And I think that's more of a interpersonal relationship challenge. And it's something that doesn't often get talked about or addressed, but that relationship with self and how significant that is actually.
Yeah. And I think the mask throws into that too. And the social awkwardness, like when you meet somebody, It's like, do I take the mask off?
Yeah.
Like if you're together in a restaurant or in a car or even at the office. We have some people wearing a mask at the office and some not, and
yes.
so it's socially awkward. And what are we saying? What are we projecting?
Well, it's funny that you speak about the mask thing, because I'm aware, like, as we started talking about the subject, and this is like, here's in the moments of how this works. Like, I'm like, whoa, we're not wearing masks. Just at this moment, like, oh my gosh, should we be wearing a mask? Are we 6 feet apart?
Right.
See, it's like a whole, I'm genuinely experiencing that as we're having the conversation, going, holy moly, like, which also really speaks to what the going back, but also the now. Like, there's a whole new conversation that we're navigating.
Yes.
And I don't mean that I don't have the answer to it, but it's just to recognize it and not diminish, nor shame it, nor blame it, or even try to pretend it's not there, because it is. Like, this is part of the conversation now. Like, and again, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to this. Like, we all have to determine what works for us. Like, I got to put my mask on. I don't feel comfortable right now.
Right.
Versus like, John over there, or, Mary is not wearing their mask, so I don't have to. It's like, hold on a minute. Like, that's another level of that, taking care of self, autonomy, like, really, like, what works for me here?
Yes.
And I think we've been really, not forced, but really the opportunity, it's almost like a fast has been going on. Like, we've had so much time in whatever capacity, more time than most people are used to oneself or with oneself. Even if it's just that I work from home now versus an office, so I'm not around people all day long.
Right.
So it's really, again, allowing us to confront ourselves in a whole new way.
So you work from home more now than the office. Do you still go into your office?
I do, yeah. But, there are lots of people around the world who have no office anymore. Like, home is the new office, I do happen to, but if I were, say, in America working as a counselor, I would likely not be going into an office.
Right.
I mean, most of my friends, counselors in America, are teleworking, and that's just the way it's happening right now.
Sure, I understand.
And, but just even having that internal conversation, how do we navigate that now? And not dismiss that.
Right.
It's a new part. It's like, it's a how-to again.
And how do we work on our social awkwardness, which I feel
it's huge.
Our generation has awkwardness, but I think the next generation or two have even more social awkwardness. I was in we have a program for sexual assault prevention and awareness, and I mentioned, how do you prevent, sexual assault? Well, everyone agreed it was communication. You talk to the person. I said, so how do you have that conversation? And immediately they look to their phones, and I'm like, the answer's not on your phone. You're not going to text this type of question. You're going to have that question in person. Well, then they all agreed, well, that type of conversation will be awkward on the first date. I said, exactly. So it takes time to build that social relationship.
Yeah.
You can't have that conversation on the first date. But I believe technology makes us feel like we can skip right to, several steps down, and we can go right to whatever, where we don't really know each other. But yet there are some people online that they take liberties that, I know you because I've read your profile or I've seen your picture, and so I believe that I know you. I think that sets a lot of us up for failure in the area of relationships.
Well, and alternatively, for some people, it provides them like almost like their avatar, right? It provides them the space and distance. It's like a twofold part. It's like it provides some people the space and distance to get to know someone in a way that might feel a little more safe for them.
That's true.
But that's not where we stop, though, with it, right? Because it's like if we rely only on that. See, it's like intimacy. It's like a way, if we're building genuine intimacy, like, that's not going to cut it.
Right. We have to be vulnerable.
Yeah,
to be intimate.
It may provide a template to do that. It may, and then, but looking at it as a bridge to intimacy, and even just including intimacy and vulnerability in the discussion. See, it's like if that's what we're going for. Right. And that what you spoke to about the question and the awkwardness of it, there's a vulnerability in that. And that's having, in some ways, vulnerability is our ability to have the difficult conversations acknowledge the truth, the reality of how we feel about something. You know, that's to me one of the ways to look at vulnerability. And it's, again, we have such a consistent opportunity to rewrite our understandings of vulnerability. It's not a negative, nor even necessarily a positive, but really just a strength. It's an opportunity for people to get to build, and it does build intimacy, vulnerability. See, so perhaps awkwardness isn't a problem. It's just a symptom.
That's true.
You know, it's just something that we go through, and I wouldn't be afraid. I have been afraid of it. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I want to encourage myself and all of us to consider that awkwardness is just a stepping stone, and it is awkward. It just is.
It is by nature.
By nature, it's to have difficult conversations, and that's not to be afraid of. Let's not be afraid of the awkwardness. Let's learn how to, and it gets easier as we do it. But the only way, like anything new, is awkward.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And we don't like to deal with guilt. We don't like to deal with shame. But yet, if we do something that we should feel guilty or we should be ashamed of, or it should be an awkward situation, we need to learn how to embrace that and manage it, and that's just the way life is. Instead of saying this is a bad emotion, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't want it either, but it's there for a reason.
Yeah. Well, it's like shame breeds. One of the best things I've learned about shame, is shame breeds in secrecy. So if we keep it hidden, it just grows.
That's true.
See, and that's like all the judgments and the blame and the shame, and it's like that game. And what I find is that's a barrier to intimacy, more so than a bridge. And so it's like awkwardness is just a symptom of, doing something different or new.
Right, that's true.
It's like, oh, I've never been, to South Korea before. I might be awkward when I try to speak a word that I've never said before, but does that mean don't do it? No, it just means it's awkward. Yeah. I may not do it because I don't feel comfortable.
Right.
But it doesn't mean don't do it.
Yes.
Awkward is not like a red flag. It's just it's a symptom of something. It's
but what do you do when people laugh at you? It's awkward.
I know,
so it's awkward
so
because you're afraid someone's going to laugh.
Yeah, right. Fear of being rejected. Well, and I think having that difficult conversation in relation, like if we go back to the sexual assault piece, and not just about that, but having difficult conversations. Fear of being rejected. Some of the big fears, right? Fear of being rejected, laughed at, made fun of, and it's like, what do you do with that? What does anyone do with that? It's so uncomfortable, but I don't know that not doing it either. It's like when we start to notice, what I notice about the fear of rejection is it's I don't necessarily have to believe everything I think.
So why are there professionals in this field, and why is that important? I have so many questions.
Yeah. Well, it's discussion, so... Well, as you were talking, I was remembering, like, even that if it's looked at as a negative expression, like going mental, right? Depends on, I guess, sometimes it's used to, I'm thinking of the UK, and it can be kind of a funny expression, but also can be derogatory, like you're mental, something's wrong with you. I think that's where we go off down a rabbit hole of sorts.
Yes.
Mental is something's wrong with you. So then when we look at mental health, just being really honest about it, a lot of stigmas about getting help.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, stigma about getting help and what that means about you. And, even just something I like to do when I'm just discussing mental health with people outside of the individual counseling sessions, but I will speak to it in individual counseling, and really you can call it a premise, or a perspective that I do my best to work with and through and from is that, there's it's back to that, there can be something wrong with you or something right with you, and I really do my best to work with myself as well as others from this what's right with us perspective. See, when we get labeled, have judgments about something's wrong with me. Even just that perspective, there's a problem, I'm broken, I need to be fixed. What I find, it starts to put us in some sort of a box or category, and it's typically not the one that most people want to be in.
Right.
Even I think, the diagnostic field, and there's nothing wrong with the diagnostic field, but even it's like once we start getting labeled and labels and ideas about things, I do my best to work from this. It's a bit more of the premise of, really like looking at this as an opportunity to learn more about myself and this place of what's right with me.
Yes.
So what that does for me, at least, is it helps to rewrite this, what I would consider to be a misunderstanding about mental health. That it's really about, there is a health and a wellness thing. And I do look at it from a more holistic perspective in that way. Like, there is the mental component. I do think they go together, physical, emotional, spiritual health.
Good.
I really do look at it as a model of, because we really are a whole, there's a lot more to us than just what we think, or just how we feel emotionally, or, you know, physically how we look.
Right.
You know, but those things are all factors, and they all matter to us.
They are.
And then I do think the spiritual level is a very important level to include in the discussion. So I look at it from that perspective, and I really like to work with a rewrite of any stigma about it in terms of getting help. You know, as really a strength builder and an opportunity to learn more about yourself.
That's good.
Yeah.
Because if you are, you know, if you fall down, you bruise yourself. You got a bruise. No one thinks anything about that. If you get a cut, okay, you treat it. But what if you have a mental cut? If you have some traumatic experience or event, or something, just a huge disappointment, your expectations were not managed or met well. And yet if we try to find help for that, or we express that I'm having a difficult day, others look at us as something's wrong with you. You're weak, or you know, why can't you figure this out on your own? Well, because it's just as important as our physical health, our mental health. Because, and I've said this to couples, you know, if you're on the aspect where you're vulnerable in the aspect of touch, emotionally, as well as physically, emotionally, it can ruin your day. It can ruin your life. If someone touches you so close that, you know, you have an argument before you walk out the door, and you're having a very difficult day, what happens if you are never able to go back and repair that relationship? Then you may have a real hard time recovering from that. So who do you go to? And that's where counselors come into play. So how do counselors help people?
Well, you know, you use the analogy of falling down and, you know, getting a cut, and we often, I do think there's but not everyone, but more common is it to go to a doctor when we feel like we've got a physical ailment or challenge. And again, not everybody likes that either, so I don't want to put everybody, there's no like, this is the way it is thing. At least I don't see that. You know, counselors, I think, provide an opportunity again to work with, you know, everyone works differently. Not even all counselors are going to work. There's so many unique styles, and so I don't even want to say all counselors are the same here. Like, I really appreciate, like, I've had a very deep and rich training in the, I guess the closest model I can think of it in terms of counseling theory and practice would be unconditional positive regard, but it's not even, it's much even broader than that, or even more encompassing than that, because it really starts to work with, so unconditional positive regard, like really this radical self-loving acceptance.
Yes.
Using loving as our foundation for our relationship with ourselves and with others.
Right.
In terms of how I talk to myself and how I talk to others. See, so, you know, not everybody comes from that model. You know, there can even be counselors working from a model, and it's nothing's wrong with this. I'm just speaking to, you can't even put counselors all in the same box.
Right.
How they can help us, I mean, just learning more about ourselves, to me is, I'll just share my experience of learning about myself. It's not like it's a twofold journey, but I really see a before and after. And the before part, like, I really started on this path of learning about myself at a pretty young age after a traumatic life experience. You know, and I didn't know how to process the trauma, but it did certainly awaken something within me that wanted to know more. That deepening opportunity. And someone in my life died when I was 19. And I loved them. You know, it was like one of those experiences. And it was kind of like this light bulb went off, or something got turned on inside of myself to, like, there's more going on here. But even at that point, I didn't quite know, you know, young person, like, how to process and work with. But it did start to, it beckoned me to ask deeper questions. So I started looking at this, like, you know, how to self-improvement, like the whole field of self-improvement.
Right.
But I was still doing it from this perspective of something was wrong with me. So the laundry list didn't necessarily get any shorter.
Right.
Nor did it necessarily change. So, then I was introduced to a new way of doing it, or a way that it wasn't necessarily new, but another way of doing it. And it included this level of loving and self-forgiveness. And it was like, wait a minute, I'm not bad or wrong because I did something that I didn't like, or because I thought something I don't like, or because I feel bad all the time. Like, wait a minute, like, and this concept, I can forgive myself for believing that, something's wrong with me, or, for judging myself. And it was,
important.
that shifted the whole game.
Yes.
So, that was like a game changer for me when I started to realize. And then from that point on, like the process of getting to know myself, it was like as a friend, not as an enemy.
Good.
And it's changed the whole conversation in a way that has been very, like, the list is it's like, they might have lists, but I check things off now.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, that's done.
That's good.
Yeah. So it's changed my relationship to myself. And that was the fundamental one for me to work with and through. And, it doesn't mean I don't have challenges or problems, of course. But
if you don't take care of yourself, who else is going to take care of you?
Yeah, and if I don't like myself, it's really hard for me to really consider that I can be met in the world in that way.
Because then you're going to try to find someone else to like you, someone else to take care of you, someone else to, and other people, honestly, they're going to spend more time worrying about themselves than they're going to spend worrying about you. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it's, changing our perspective is, it's an amazing game changer as we learn how to, or just even knowing that we have that opportunity and option available to us. What I found it to be is quite liberating to know that actually, wait a minute, there's the challenge of like, oh, wait a minute, I'm the problem, to like, oh my God, I'm the problem. Like, I'm this, like, if I'm the common denominator here.
Yes.
Again, it's like, wait, so I have the possibility, opportunity, and the option to, because it's like, if I'm looking outside of myself to change myself, that's like, I'm going to be, it's like as a climbing up a ladder, and I'm constantly keep going. But when it comes to, it's like, oh, hold on a minute here. Like, I have this within myself, this capacity, it can be like humbling,
right,
by all means. And it's sometimes even overwhelming, but at the same time, like, hold on a minute, like, that means there's a possibility here, like an empowerment option. Like, hold on a minute, like, I don't need this person in order to do it. That I actually have this within myself, this capacity. It's like, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
This is kind of cool. I can still have people in my life who love him, but they can just love me now. I don't need them in order to be okay.
Yeah.
They just get, it doesn't mean it still doesn't happen that I feel that way, but then there's also this other place inside that can go, oh, I can also provide this loving and caring for myself.
We're so ready to acknowledge that we are the problem, but we're so reticent to acknowledge that we are also the solution.
Yeah, right.
So that's
important. What if it became that we also, and speaking of wellness and this times that we're in, perhaps it's like we also have the opportunity to acknowledge, yes, we're the problem, but we're also the solution.
Yes.
And what if that could be one of the wonderful opportunities that COVID has provided for us here?
Yes.
Much like when we looked at when we stopped moving around so much and pollution started to,
yes,
numbers of like the
pollution decrease
in pollution, right? Like,
and wildlife could come back.
Right. Yeah, you've seen animals walking down city streets when you weren't seeing as many cars. So it's like we're the problem, but we're also the solution.
That's right.
See, and that's an actual opportunity statement.
Good.
So
I think that's one of the things counselors do best. We help people sort out their own issues that they're wrestling with and try to clarify what is the problem and to see the other side.
Yeah.
And to find resilience. So.
Well, it's like reframe and rewrite our stories,
Yes.
and perhaps they're not as written in stone. But like you're speaking to, that's a great reminder that what counseling can do for us is not only, like, now we also have someone else who's helping us to look at the situation and the problem that we're experiencing.
Right.
So we're not alone in it, and we have someone else who can like take it out. It's like we're taking it out from in our head where it just maybe recycling itself and putting it out there.
Right.
That alone can do so much for so many.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
oh, wait a minute, hold on. Like, I am now, like, not alone with my thoughts in my head, speaking of isolation. Like, now there's another person here. It's like we've turned on a light.
Yes.
Versus sitting in the dark room of ourselves and our thoughts.
Have you ever done sand tray therapy?
Not so much, but folks that I went to school with, it was a big deal. Yeah, oh, yeah, no, I remember. I had a counselor. I received counseling when I was back in grad school. Yeah,
I use that once in a while.
Fun.
Because it allows the person to put out of their head, put it onto the sand, and then they can change it, manipulate it, you know. And they can also look at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, move it around, use objects and symbols to speak to the challenge. Yeah, exactly. It gets anytime we can depersonalize a problem or challenge, or
detach from it a little bit and
look at it in a new way. Oh God, just do something different, even if it's one thing.
Right.
It does a big deal. Let's not like diminish the small steps. Each step is significant.
So how's that different from just getting advice from a friend or a loved one?
Well, you know, I know for myself when I have loved ones, and I do go to friends for advice and help as needed, but I also go to my counselor and my mentor. And in part because it's like, you know, there's a personal relation. You know, my friends and my loved ones, it's like the personal relationship, right? You know, and they have an invested interest in my well-being and happiness. So there's a certain bias that comes in by nature. And that's wonderful. I love that. I'm so grateful for that. Like my friend, you know, of course they care about me.
Yes.
And again, I say this and I do notice this is also speaking to when I put on my, you know, like when I'm working with someone in a session, there's something that I am stepping into, you know, it's like, it's not a role per se, but it's like I'm putting on my counselor coat. Not literal, metaphorically, that it's like, you know, there's a certain focus that comes into play.
Right.
Like this is time and place devoted to. It's like a devotional, an opportunity for this person to look at this situation in their life and to, you know, learn about it, reflect upon it. So it's subtle, but there's a distinction.
Yeah.
I know for myself when I walk into a session or step into that, it's like this is time for this now. It's a devotional time or a set aside for this. So it's subtle, but it is different.
It is different.
And again, we started the conversation that way. Like, how do we step in another? Well, we do. We just do.
You do.
Like when I'm talking to friends, I'm not necessarily counseling them, but of course my skill sets will come into play.
That's right. And those skill sets are active listening. So you're listening more than you're talking. That's an active skill set that a lot of people do not have. They don't possess. Yeah. And instead of listening to somebody, they turn it around and make it about them instead of about the other person.
Yeah.
That's important. The ability not to get drawn into a person's drama or story is also important, to be able to detach professionally and to be objective. That's important.
Yeah. Do our best to not judge, you know.
Yes.
And like you spoke to, listen and, you know, using our empathy and our understanding. And empathy varies very, very different than sympathy. Sometimes our friendships may have a little, not always, but, you know, sometimes that gets involved because it's personal.
And much more sympathy than empathy.
Yeah, it can be in our friendships too with people who have that skill set, but it's not always the case.
And then there's the models that we can use, whether they're solution focus or a cognitive behavior therapy. You know, those models that just gives us some sort of a paradigm to go through and to work through. That's important. And our friends and loved ones, well-meaning, they don't necessarily have any model to go by. They just do their best, or sometimes they want to give advice when really there's no advice to be given. It's just a listening ear is important. Well, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do we survive the COVID?
How do we
slowing
survive?
down, you were mentioning, take our time. Don't be in a rush.
Yeah, and reaching out, of course. Yeah, I think that asking for help and reaching out for help as needed, taking our time. You know, really, I'm a big fan of and proponent of, and do the best I can with this myself, is learning how to be kind to ourselves and to others as this is a difficult time. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's challenging. And there's a lot of So having as much compassion as we can for ourselves and for others.
Good.
You know?
Yeah, that's really good.
I am a big fan of that, and, you know, not dismissing the challenge.
Yeah.
Acknowledging it, and then, like, learning how do we do this and what do we do with it.
That's good. Yeah. Making plans and being patient with the when we can actually make the plans come true, or we can work towards them, or...
Well, and maybe it's an opportunity to even reframe plans. Like we've gotten, you know, that hasn't been easy to plan. It's really hard to plan right now, but how do we also, but not also having to give up everything, how do we start to, like, we can still have dreams and envisioning what we want more of. It may not be about attaching to it being, it's like, I like to look at it as more like quality sometimes, and even like, you know, it's not necessarily about like, I want to go do all these things, but what qualities am I wanting more of right now? Because it is pretty hard to plan right now, just being real about that.
You don't know.
But how can we don't want to shut down our dreaming, creative potential. It's like, maybe it's like chaos, you know, it's like the birthplace or the mother of creativity.
Yes.
So we don't have to forget the creativity just because we have a lot of chaos right now.
It's good.
So we want to keep working that creative potential too, and creativity.
You keep mentioning reframe, and I think that's also very important. So the ability to look at something that you just see as terrible, awful, but then to reframe it into a different perspective and say, well, if it wasn't for that, then I wouldn't be here. So COVID has made it where we've lost our ability to do certain things. Take, for example, maybe we've been more isolated, we've been more alone, but that gives us the ability to look inside and say, you know, I need to do this more, or this is an aspect of me that I think I need to change. Maybe I'm too lazy. Maybe I'm not focused on goals and achievements that I need to do. Or the opposite. Maybe I'm just so focused on achieving goals that I can't accomplish. I'm so frustrated. Maybe I need to take a look at myself and be a little bit more gracious toward myself and allow myself to have more time to accomplish things. So a reframe. That's very important.
Yeah.
Well, good, Teri. Well, as we finish up, I got these questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
They're just simple. Just choose one or the other. So, destination or journey?
Destination or journey? Journey.
Okay. Half full, half empty?
Half full.
Time travel, yes or no?
Yes.
And time versus money?
Money. That's interesting.
Island or peninsula?
Island.
And finally, where is home?
Inside of me.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, thank you, Teri, very much for being with me today. And for those that are watching, again, my name is Curtis, and this is Lovers, Allies, and Friends. Hope that you enjoyed it, and thank you for viewing.
Thank you. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks for the time.
You're welcome.
It's fun.